Well, good evening and good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to the panel, Does Board Diversity Really Drive Financial Performance and Economic Growth? It's a topic that still remains debatable. And today we have an incredible panel that's joining us literally from all over the world, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi, and Australia. So that's real commitment to diversity. I would like to introduce you to the panel. So we have His Excellency Jamal Fakhro, the Managing Partner of KPMG Bahrain and the first Vice Chairman of Bahrain's Shura Council. We have Noor Adhami, who is the Regional Head of Global Liquidity and Cash Management at HSBC UAE. We have Dr. Basmah Omair, researcher, founder and CEO of BMO Management Consulting, and a board member of the Saudi National Women's Council, and she's also the chairwoman of the W20 Female Labour Market Inclusion Committee. And last but not least, we have Saffron, who is the vice chair of 100 Women in Finance and the founder and managing director of Maysaffron, and also chairman of the Australia Middle East Business Group Association. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm going to dive right in, Jamal, starting with you. So many commentators suggest that gender diversity in the boardroom improves company performance and financial performance because of the different points of view that diversity offers. KPMG has done a lot of research on this issue. So can you share some of those studies about the impact of board diversity on financial performance, but also other aspects of corporate performance, and what you've experienced with regards to the impact of diversity at KPMG?
Leena, thank you very much for inviting me today for this this session. I'm delighted to be among four ladies here. I feel glad to be a minority for the first time, and hopefully will not be the last time. So glad to be with you all. Really, to be frank with you, I am a great supporter to the women's movement wherever they are, and I'm a great also believer that maybe we should really consider discussing such subjects of diversity furthermore. It has to be a normal subject. We have to believe of the equal empowerment of men and women. We have to move forward and stop running sessions only to talk about how we can empower women. This could happen in the 19th century, early 20th century, but not anymore the 21st century. So maybe in the future, and I'm serious on that. I always, whenever I go and talk about women participation, I always believe that all of us, men and women, have got one goal: to ensure that we'll have 50% participation for each sex, for gender. So until we achieve that, we need to fight and work hard to ensure that women are respected, are participating in every single aspect of our life, whether it is business, whether it is home, education, just name it. They have to be there, definitely on their strength, exactly as the men, who will not take a position unless they are capable of handling that. I am a great believer that our ladies all over the world are great participants, and we have seen that in all fronts. When we talk about the importance of diversity in board and the impact of financial, I would tell you, I mean, there are a few facts, and I'm sure others will share their own views themselves from their own studies. But there are definitely there are few facts to suggest the following. First of all, that 34% of women are better at working out compromises. So there is a study to say that you ladies, you are better than the men by 34% in reaching to a compromise. And I think this is a normal thing, ladies, because this is built in your culture. It's a 34% more likely to be honest and ethical. And you tell me today, on all the scandals, how many ladies' names we have heard about and how many gentlemen's names about. There's a huge difference between, and especially in the scandals and ethical issues, when you see how many ladies are there and how many men are there. It says 25% more likely to stand up for their beliefs. And I can tell you, I totally believe, I see that, and everywhere we go. 30% more likely to provide fair pay and benefits. And last but not least, it's a 25% better at mentoring. You are mothers, and you know how to mentor. You have been growing the whole generation of the world, and you know how to mentor people. So these are some facts that came out of studies conducted by KPMG and others to say that how important really in having women in board. And for me personally, I can tell you in my office in KPMG in large, or in my office in Bahrain, or in our region, we always believe that when we have ladies, women in the boardroom, we will definitely achieve a lot quicker and better results than having one sex in that room. Women will make us stand on our legs, will make us really focus more, and they will help us a lot because of the list of 5 items I have just shared with you. They will help us a lot to focus more on our business and to perform better and to have a better efficiency. You know, I was joking with you ladies earlier to say that Corona would definitely make a major impact on your participation in boardroom and other things. In the old days, unfortunately, we have ladies leaving their posts early because they have to go to take care of the kids and the family. This should not continue anymore. We should really fight and ensure that our businesses will allow us, men and women, to work from home. The issue of coming to the office and tracking your card or putting your whatever finger in the time ledger, this should stop. And we can work from home, take care of our kids, take care of our family, take care of our businesses, out from home and out from offices. So I believe if all the businesses started to change their think of how to run business, rather than going to office, but stay wherever you are, you ladies will have a great opportunity to show your strength. You will not be pushed to leave the boardrooms or your businesses, the senior businesses, early, and you will continue, and that will be a great competition for the men. I will stop here, Leena, and leave the floor to the ladies to comment.
Sure. Thank you for that, Jamal. And so what you're saying is women really are the superheroes that boards and companies need. To borrow a term from actually Professor Renee Adams' research, she was supposed to join us in this panel, and unfortunately she was unable to make it. But in her research, she talks about some of the things that you mentioned in terms of the characteristics that women have. And some of the characteristics she mentions, aside from better negotiation skills and the other things that you have just mentioned, that women actually at a board level, they are self-directed, which is a quality that heroes have. They're more benevolent, which is, benevolence is a quality that you would associate with a hero. And also, contrary to popular belief, they actually do take risks. So although women are less risk averse than men, women who are in leadership, especially as CEOs or on a board level, actually are the opposite. They are willing to take more risks. And if you think about it, to get to those positions, they had to be able to take more risks. So before I ask the next question to Ellie, I just wanted to give you a chance, the rest of the panelists, if you wanted to respond to anything that Jamal just said, because I know he said a lot and I saw a few people taking notes.
I would like to comment on the last point that he mentioned with regards to taking care of families, and sometimes they drop out of the career journeys early on. What we have seen at HSBC, based on the number of surveys that we conduct, so many women also stop themselves from applying for senior roles because of the perception that it will have more obligations on them with regards to kind of dedicating more time to work. So the talent pool is there. There's no shortage in talent, but it's about how do we manage and balance between all of these responsibilities that kind of holds women back, and they need to sometimes kind of push through that, because the biological clock is usually fighting with the professional clock. When you're in your mid-year career and in the middle of your career, when you're kind of aspiring for more senior roles, most probably many women are mothers and they have to take care of kids and teenagers. So it's kind of always conflicting, and you have to find a very, very thin balance between when do you push yourself for an aggressive career, but you also have duties to care for children. So it is definitely a very tough balance for women to keep.
Absolutely, and I think that especially, you know, with the pandemic and sort of having women trying to be educators, caretakers, and also maintaining their professional careers is going to be more difficult. And in one of the panels we had yesterday, there was a woman who was talking about how her grandmother or her mother was so supportive, you know, looking after her kids when she had to fly, you know, all over the place, and she made senior partner at a firm. And now she does the same for her daughter who lives in London, where she will fly back to London, you know, just for a week to babysit so her daughter can go to conferences and continue to, you know, advance in her career. And so I know, not to put anyone on the spot, but I think it's worth us kind of considering and asking, how do we bring that it takes a village, family unit kind of support system to the workplace? Because I think that that's going to be really important if we see this transition of more female leadership. So
that's an interesting question. I think with people now working away from family, from the bigger family, it's pretty difficult to find that support. And I think we need to be careful when we look at job distributions and job attractiveness in major cities, that it is taking away from, there's a brain drain from other cities and rural areas. And that is going to cause a lot of issues with support down the line. And I think back to what Jamal was saying about COVID-19, I think one of the most important changes that happened is the mindset change that happened in the male perspective when it comes to working from home. Because before, if a woman asked for such flexibility, she was looked upon that she's not going to be as creative or as productive because she's working from home. But now that men actually tried it and saw how productive it is, and there's less interruptions, there's more focus, a lot of things can get done in less hours, they've actually have the experience now to support such changes. Of course, multinational companies from a long time, they had more flexible hours and they were more in tune to the needs of their females and male employees. They had paternal leave. So some companies were a bit advanced and knew that, you know, this is the way to go for a more balanced lifestyle, especially catering to millennials coming into the workforce and the way they're changing the private sector as it is. So I think COVID did bring that, highlight of that issue.
absolutely. And you know, while I kind of have you, there's a lot of research that you've done on diversity in general, and I'm going to get to the research you've done specifically on family boards. But I was reading an interesting study in Harvard Business Review that said that actually they found that gender diversity relates to increased market value and revenue only in contexts where people already believe in gender diversity, so where it's normatively accepted. So in other words, it's almost this self-fulfilling cycle. And countries and industries that don't view gender diversity as important end up not actually benefiting from it. I've also heard a similar argument with the pandemic. So a lot of, I'm sure all of you are aware, there's been a lot of articles about women's leadership in the pandemic and how countries led by women have had fewer cases and have managed to contain the virus. But then the counter argument I've heard is that the countries led by women were already doing better in the first place, because in order for them to have had a woman, it means that they've already broken those barriers of sexism and exclusion and all of these other factors. So I'm curious to hear your views on that, and what your work and your research has shown.
Well, definitely. Even in the research that I will talk about later, but the family-owned businesses and the role of women on the board of directors, it shows that when the government started promoting more women inclusion in the workforce, family businesses were also affected and started looking at their role differently and started integrating more of their females. Even if third generation, maybe the second generation, weren't educated or didn't align their education with the business needs. So definitely when the normalcy in society, there's more acceptance to it, the regulations support it, the government pushes for it, you see it, and the private sector gets affected by it, no doubt, and family businesses is a big part of the private sector. As far as leadership, women leadership, there's few examples. We don't have, there's also, to be fair to the men, there are also male leaders around the world and in the region who have succeeded to contain the pandemic. So I think here it comes down to leadership per se, and traits, and the concern about their citizens, and also the mindset of the citizens to follow direction. So I think there's a lot of layers to when we're talking about COVID and the reaction to that, and people controlling the pandemic. So I don't think we can just tie it down to a gender, to be fair. I think it's more about different leadership traits and readiness of the society.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ellie, you've also done research on the link between diversity and financial performance, and you work in the UAE, but you've done research in Australia, which is where you're joining us from now. Can you share some of your findings and maybe the differences you've seen in Australia with listed companies, and what you've seen in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. So to give everyone some background, I've lived in the UAE for 13 years, and I am a former female fund manager, and I was working at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority as a fund manager back in 2009 when I started this study. And what basically drove me to start it was the narrative and discussion coming out of the Scandinavian countries at the time about introducing quotas, particularly around board and gender equality. So I was sitting in ADIA. I'd been in the region a couple of years. Obviously, was young, was female, was a bit of a minority where I was sitting, and ambitious, and thought, oh no, that sounds awful. Introducing quotas, everyone will think that I'm only sitting in the seat I'm sitting in because of quotas. That sounds like a really bad idea. And then as an analyst, I thought, well, hang on, does it even matter? Does it make a difference? Should they have women on boards? Should they have diversity on boards? And I decided to do my dissertation on this topic, and measured the female representation on boards of the top 200 listed Australian companies, because I was running the Australian equity portfolio for ADIA at the time, and measured the financial performance of these companies over a 5-year period. So I measured their EPS return, their total shareholder return, and their return on equity, as well as measured the gender representation of females on the boards, but also on the senior executive management teams. At the time, I was also very passionate about diversity outside of gender, so age diversity. And I think it's important to mention at this point that it's not just age that's important, particularly at the moment, but also racial diversity, religious diversity, even demographic diversity is really important. A board should represent the cosmos of society that company or organization that it serves. And so it's very rare that a company or organization is only serving the like-minded people that are usually sitting on a board. So I did the study, I did the measure, and what the sort of overall key findings, I'll just focus on a couple of points, were that in the companies that had above average female representation on boards and executive teams, those companies were in the top quarter of performance of the financial measures that we did. Interestingly, companies that had only one female representation did not perform in that category, and in many cases often underperformed. And the sort of key takeaway of all of that is that is a couple of things, and is backed up by some other studies that I studied as part of the study, and that is when you have one different person in a group or in a decision-making group or on a board or whatnot, the rest of the group, if they're alike, have a lot of trouble listening to what that person is actually saying. And so if you put another person that's different in the same group with them, this other study found that the group that is meant to be listening to them and taking on their views and whatnot are able to more, with greater clarity and with less distraction, hear what they're actually saying and not focus on the fact that they're different. So this alone made me sort of start to think, well, hang on, maybe there is a case for quotas here, because it seems like it's going to help people to sort of deal with their unconscious bias and their distractions that we all sort of naturally have, and it's going to result in some better financial performance. Another point that could sort of help to explain the study is the concept of tokenism, and it also helps to explain the reason why, when there was only one woman in the study, that those companies didn't perform that well. And so tokenism can either reflect a company's culture, which is actually the real reason why that the company is underperforming, but it also means that if you've got people just taking seats for the sake of it, then they're not actually able to implement effect. They're not actually able to give their view. They're not able to represent the society or the part of society that they're meant to be representing in that role or in that seat. So that's sort of in a nutshell what the study covered and what we discovered. Interestingly, back then, 11 years ago, average female representation was more than one woman, which in a board setting has improved dramatically today, and I'm happy to go on a little bit more about that later on if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think first of all, and I'd love to hear the rest of the panel's thoughts, I've flip-flopped on the issue of quotas. I think most women I know who work on gender equity initially are against quotas, and then sort of realize that, you know, the more research you read and some of the issues that you've mentioned, that actually it takes at least 3 women on the board for there to be an impact or a difference. Also, women help to amplify each other and are perceived differently when, you know, they're not just the one minority. I'd love to just hear from the panel what your views are on quotas. I mean, it can just be a quick, are you for quotas at least in the beginning or not? And if not, you know, what are the reasons? And also I'm curious to hear from the attendees, should we have quotas or not? So if you can just post in the chat.
Let me talk about quotas. You know, I mean, it is unfortunate that sometimes we have to go to the quota route until people realize the importance of the other gender and taking their responsibilities. Now we know that quota is a common thing in parliament and political societies and political parties and so on and so forth. And in a few cases, in some of the board of directors, they started to have something to be called a quota for women or for the millennials. Now, I don't mind to go for a quota for a short period. But I do believe, really, I do believe we need, as I started earlier, we need to change the mindset of people. To say we have got 50% of the community, of the population, they need to participate equally like the men. And that is the message that we should work on. If we have to go for a quota for 10 years, whatever is that, that's fine. I mean, if you go back 10 years, 15 years back in this part of the world, you can hardly see any single woman sitting on any board. Today, in the past, I would say decade or 2 decades, we have seen that number is only on the increase and not on the decrease. And I know many boards here in Bahrain and in the GCC who have got more than one lady sitting on that board, and some of them sit as a chairperson, and some of them sit as board committees chairperson, and so on and so on. So I'm a great believer that, okay, if we have to go to quota, I have no problem, but only for the short period.
I have a different view on the quotas. We have the Shura Council in Saudi has a great percentage, one of the highest percentage of female participation. When it comes to the private sector, I believe the government needs to include, and it is actually doing a lot, having women in leadership position. But when it comes to the private sector, I think incentives right now is a good phase to go before we do a quota. First of all, because women are recently joining the private sector, so the expertise and the skills that they have, they're still in the process of building it, because as you know, recently they have integrated into the private. Second of all, I think if we do incentivize, and we've given that recommendation a few years back, we have the Nitaqat program here, which is the Saudization program for KSA. And if we give different incentives for companies that have females on their board, maybe we can start changing behavior in a positive way. I think we need to think of even, just more incentives along that way. But interesting, when you talk about quotas, and usually in the Arab region, and they say, no, we don't have it, just exactly what I just said. Women are not, we don't have enough qualified women and so forth. I could justify it because literally women recently, and with data, just started entering the workforce in KSA a few years back. So, but I was visiting Germany a few years back, an official visit, and during that visit that year, they announced quotas. I think it was about 20% for executive boards. And the Germans were not happy with it at the time, and they thought, where are we going to find women that have the expertise? It's like, oh my God, okay, so if Germany is saying that thing, so maybe this is just a male kind of thinking that everybody, as soon as you put quota, everybody thinks we can't find the women. And so I think you kind of need to introduce it, get people ready for it, and do incentives until we do get that level of women that can actually be on board of directors level.
Noor, if I'm not mistaken, HSBC's board is, I think, is it 30%?
Yeah. Yeah, so 25% for the Middle East female, and I mean, I've always I keep on changing my mind on quotas. It depends on how they are used, and every incident is different, right? But I think what we do in HSBC is that the quota is there to encourage the right behaviors when it comes to the selection process, whether it's at the board or even in the senior executive levels within the organization. So for example, when we are trying to recruit for a senior position, it's a must to have a woman, if not two, in the candidate list that make it to the final round of interviews. And then when you are interviewing, the panel of interviewers has to have a woman as well. So I think because of the imposition of quotas, it pushed us to have better behaviors in terms of how do we make sure that the funnel that feeds into these roles have enough women. And I think that, I said it earlier, I'll say it again, I don't think that there's any shortage in talent when it comes to women. It's about, they need a little bit more of a kind of a push, a little bit of more belief in themselves, and also circumstances. I don't want to undermine circumstances, and sometimes it doesn't work. But generally speaking, women are very sometimes overly conservative when they're assessing themselves. So if you look at a new job ad, if you don't tick every single requirement, most probably women don't apply. Whilst as a hiring manager myself, I look at some of our colleagues, the men, when they apply, they might meet 40%, and in their mind, they say, we'll work on the remaining 60% on the job, whilst women want to kind of hit the ground running. And I think that's the biggest gap that we try to work on in HSBC and all of the programs that we run, is how do we make women kind of make peace with the fact that you don't have to know everything in day one. And that kind of builds confidence, and then you'll have more women raise their hand and say, you know what, I want to throw my hat in the ring for that role, which before wasn't the case. So that's what we're working on, and quotas did help us kind of make sure that we have those discussions with the talented women in those roles.
You do, I mean, HSBC places a lot of emphasis on diversity in senior leadership, which really paves the way for those women to even get to the boardroom. So aside from some of the things that you've mentioned, can you share a little bit more on what you do in that space? And I know imposter syndrome, or just having women throw their hat in the ring, like you said, are two very important things. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been working for HSBC for the past 16 years. So what I'm going to say now is not kind of some points that I'm pulling out of a textbook or a policy. It's something that I've lived and kind of went through in this bank. So the first thing I would talk about is the culture, and Dr. Basmah alluded to this a little bit earlier with regards to multinationals kind of being a little bit on the forefront in terms of supporting women. So I had my first child in 2008, and back then flexible working was a norm for us. It wasn't something that's still new, as I see in some of the other organizations that we come across. And it really helped me balance between my new role as a mom and my job responsibilities. And the same happened when I had my second child, and I never felt that having the duties at home stood in the way of me progressing. And as a matter of fact, I got one of my promotions whilst I was on maternity leave, which sometimes people think that this is unheard of. And that was in 2010, which is a long time ago. So the culture is the first thing that we work on in HSBC. We spoke about quotas, so I'm not going to go into that again. But then we look at training programs that are specifically designed for women. And there are two flagship programs, which are Accelerating into Leadership and Accelerating for Leadership. And those two programs, we've contracted with external parties and vendors, consultants specifically, to train women on some of the things that they need to acquire in order to pursue senior roles. And the uptake of these programs is high. You have to qualify to get into these programs, and we can see that now we are more aware of who's talented and what's the pool that we need to draw upon. And then hiring practices, I just spoke about making sure you have women, making sure that the panel has women as well, assessing the candidates running for a job. And generally speaking, we have lots of groups in the bank, like the Balance Group, which is actually celebrating its 10 years anniversary in 2020. And they've led so many projects and initiatives to ensure that we are a well-diverse organization. And gender is only one lens. There's so many aspects to diversity, but definitely gender diversity is one of the biggest kind of aspirations we have.
Great, thank you for sharing. And it seems, I mean, that you're doing very well at that. And I'm not just saying that, but everyone I've spoken to, the women I've met at HSBC, it seems like the culture is really genuine and authentic and very supportive. So
I want to congratulate you on getting your promotion while on maternity leave, because I work a lot through BMO Management Consulting to do culture shift strategies with organizations, and I meet a lot with this. Gender is a big part of that culture shift, and I meet women who are about to have babies who don't want to take their maternity leave because they're afraid they're going to miss out on their promotion, and that shows you a lot about what culture, the culture they have at work. And so I just want to congratulate the fact that you were able to get that.
Thank you.
And Dr.
Leena,
Yes.
I just want to drive your attention and the rest. There are lots of comments on the chat. Maybe you can use that, and there are different opinion on quota and so on. It will be just fair if you go through them and quickly read them to the participant. A lot of everybody have got access to them. But there are some very good comments.
Yes, there are, and I also want to get to Dr. Basmah's research. So let's just have a look quickly on what we have on quotas. So some of the comments, are you able to see the comments in the chat?
Yes.
All of you?
Yeah. I just have a bit more to add while you're going through it, perhaps, Leena. So just one other story and an anecdote on this topic that I guess links to help think about or frame the conversation around quotas is about unconscious bias, and it's about it's not just directed at say men or decision makers who are men, but also women, particularly as more women move up as well. So I was flown in 2015 to Hong Kong to speak at an Asian investment forum on this topic about my study, and I'd sort of been a minority female in the funds management world at ADIA for 8 years. I worked at Macquarie Bank for 4 years before that. I was on 100 Women in Finance as a member and part of the committee, and felt that I was a real I wouldn't have had any unconscious bias about women in roles and in our place. That said, before I went, I knew I was going to be talking about the Heidi Howard case study, which I'm happy to quickly talk about. But I also thought I would mention to people about this unconscious bias test, which Harvard provides online for everyone to do. And but I'll just go on and I'll do the unconscious bias test before I go, because just to see what it's like, because I'm going to be talking about it. So I took the test and I failed. And I failed with all this unconscious bias that I had no awareness of and no idea about, despite the fact that I was fighting it all the time. And it sort of made me realize that we all need that. I've seen chats pop up as we've been talking now about whether it's quotas or people need to change mindsets or people need to back themselves, that sort of thing. And I think, yeah, it's interesting to think about, to sort of awaken our own unconscious bias. I'm always thinking about it myself now, testing it, thinking, is this my unconscious bias or is this a real sort of thought? And it also helped me to think that quotas weren't as bad as I first feared, for that reason too, because it helps us get over an unconscious hurdle.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've done the test that you're talking about, and I've actually, in some of the D&I workshops I've done in the past for clients, I've had people say to me, I'm so mortified because when I did the implicit bias test for people with disabilities, my sibling is disabled and I still had an unconscious bias. And so they've been, it's something that's inherently human. And I think it's the first step is just the awareness and the consciousness that it exists so that you can address it. I want to read 2 questions from the participants. So one question is for Dr. Basmah. You had mentioned on the issue of quotas that we need incentives. And so someone is asking what kind of incentives. And then another question that's a bit more general for everyone is, where do we kind of go from here in the region? How do we actually create action beyond just these discussions?
Okay. For the quotas, I believe the government boards and the government positions, I think quotas is a great idea. When it comes to the private sector, is when I'm thinking of the incentives. And one of the incentives is we have the ranking system, which is taqat here, nitaqat, sorry. And that ranks the companies to their Saudiization levels. And so you have platinum, green, and yellow and red. And so everybody here is on that same program. So if you have women in leadership positions, or if you have women on the board of directors, I think that should add to your rank, and that should add to more privileges that you have, and maybe even the way you get a government contract. So we keep on adding incentives. The reason is because just for a few years, I don't think we will have enough to fill up board level females, but soon we will, because now that women are into the private sector, they're going to go up the rank, and they will have the experience to be there. So I think we need to look at creative incentives to help them mentor, to help them sponsor women, to be able to fast track them into such leadership position. And you mentioned something earlier, Leena, about women helping women in meetings and things of that sort, and sounding, and that is amazing. However, it's even more powerful when the man sponsors a woman, and when the man is a mentor to a woman. That just speeds her career, her confidence, her exposure, especially that women lack a lot of the networking events, or not by default somehow invited to all the important ones. And so having a mentor that is a male does wonders to a woman's career. And there's difference between mentor and sponsorship. I think at the end of the day, if you have somebody that will really teach you the ropes of the business, of things that are even skills that are just not written, politics, within the company, things of that sort.
Yeah.
Can I comment here? You ask a question from where we go from here to the next step.
Yeah.
10, 15 years, 20 years back, we didn't accept anything to be called independent directors on the board. Today, in every single board, there is at least 2 to 3 independent directors. And governments and regulations are pushing those independent directors to be the chairman of the bank, of the board, and the chairman of the audit committee. 2 very influential meetings. They didn't ask for anything. They said, they didn't question. They said, please go and do it. We need this kind of regulations.
Yes.
Why we insist on independent board, we should also go and insist on having a proper diversity. Today they say you would need, out of 10, you need to have 3 independent directors. So why don't we go and say, out of this remaining 7, you need to have half and half different diversity. So we need to put regulations in order to enforce this to happen. This, even in Scandinavia, this did not happen just like this. In all of Europe, it didn't happen just like this. It was by regulations. So if we cannot change the mindset of the people, which will take us ages to do so, let's use our empowerment by regulations and change the laws.
Actually, it's very interesting that you say that, Jamal, because I came through across a piece of it was an article published by Goldman a while back that they refuse to help private companies go public through the IPO process. Sorry, we're sustainability. So they wouldn't help organizations to go public through the IPO process unless they have women on board. And in a way, you could call this an incentive, but it's actually a barrier for them to go public if they don't have that. So there are lots of ways by which the regulation can kick in, and everyone has a role to play, not only regulators as regulatory bodies, but a bank like Goldman Sachs, known for helping corporates go public, is playing their part as well.
I want to ask just one more question from the panelists, and then we'll come back to the discussion. So just as a devil's advocate, do you think that women first need to believe in their own potential? So this is kind of relating to what we were saying earlier about the self-doubt that women have.
Yes, but they also need the opportunity. I mean, you could believe all you want about how great you are, and you know your experience, and you know you're knowledgeable, and you can have a master's, a PhD, whatever, education you have. But if you don't have the opportunity, and that was what was happening in Saudi Arabia, at least for a few decades back, where only basically two industries were open for women, either education sector or the health sector. And so a lot of women, you know, either you go here, you go there, you open your own business, and usually it was either beauty salons or tailor shops. So there's very limited opportunities. So you can't then say you don't believe in yourself. There's a few that were able to go global, but the majority wasn't able to do that. So now when the regulations are more, you know, pro-women, inclusion and diversity, getting them in leadership positions, having them also in the scholarships abroad. So getting that pool of talent and pushing and creating the regulations to support the integration of women in national development. Now you have opportunities. Now you can say, okay, believe in yourself, and you give them the support and get them. But if the opportunities weren't there before, we can't really blame women for not believing in themselves.
Right.
So it takes both to happen.
May I say one thing here, Leena? I think that women have the potential and the opportunity exists as well. But I'd say something that's a bit maybe difficult to say in an open call, and I'd be interested in seeing what Jamal has to say. But I feel one of the biggest barriers for women is that they don't have enough support at home. And if you look at all of the evidence after COVID and women stuck at home working from home, they were the ones who are still doing the majority of house chores, whether it's childcare, homeschooling, and what have you. And I always do tell women in the smaller networking forums that we have, if you're not married yet, make sure that you choose the right partner, because you really need to have the proper partner who would help you kind of thrive and push you forward, rather than feeling like you have two jobs, one in the office and one back at home. So I'm not sure what, Jamal, what do you think about men in the generations? Are they changing through the generations? Do you think that they're more open to sharing chores at home?
You know, today I was talking to one of my managers in the office. And I said, are you in the office or you are home? I said, Jamal, you know, I got my first baby 2 weeks ago. And I'm sitting next to my wife and my little son, giving them all my support. And I said, thank you very much, because we are able to work from home. We are able to give them the support they need. It is changing. People want to see. People in the past believe that the men have to go to do the work, bring money to home, and whatever it is. Okay? And ladies have to compromise, leave their jobs, as we said earlier, leave their job, their position, and take care of their family. I will tell you one thing. I will not be surprised tomorrow to see somebody, a gentleman, would not go back to the office and say, because my wife have got something to do back in the office, I have to stay home to take care of the kids. And we need to bring this into the culture.
Normalcy.
We need to bring this into the culture, to tell people that, listen, guys, now you are talking about modernization, talking about a new mindset. You need to take responsibility at home as much as taking the responsibility at office. Don't say I have to go back to the office because you can do work at home today. And therefore I'm saying this working from home policy is going to change a lot in our life going forward. And one of it is the empowerment of women.
Yeah, I believe what Noor said, that the biggest career decision a woman will make is the husband she chooses. So choose carefully, because that will affect your career big time.
Yeah, and I would ask, yeah, exactly. I would ask the woman to choose carefully her husband.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
And the father plays a big role, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're saying potential, reaching potential and finding potential, I think also the father plays a big role in his daughter's life and empowering her. So he's the first man that she meets. And so it just, men have a lot to do with women's empowerment, more than they think.
So that's a great segue into your research on family businesses, because family businesses contribute about 80% of the regions or the GCC's non-oil GDP.
Revenue.
And you looked at how women who are not necessarily on the board, but women within families, the impact that they have on the board and even on the cohesiveness and the health of the company. So grandmothers, wives, and so on. Could you share a bit of that research and some of the findings? Because I find this so fascinating.
Thank you. Well, the research was done on the JCC region, large companies and mid-sized companies, family-owned, and we did first generation, second generation, third generation. Of course, the finding is that depending on the mindset of the founder whether it's a father or if it's in the second generation phase as a company, then the director, usually it's a brother. If they believe in women empowerment, then you'd find the women in the company. If not, then you'd find that they are not part of it. Now I want to define what is first generation, second generation, third generation when it comes to the women, and what are the different roles that they are playing, whether formally or informally. And just to make a note that until 2008 in Saudi Arabia, women could not be officially on the board of directors, even in family-owned companies, IPOs, or listed companies. So this was something that we worked on actually as part of the legislation that was reformed with the Ministry of Commerce at the time. So it took us 2 years, but it got done. So until then, you could just imagine what was happening before 2008. So the first generation female is usually the founder's wife, and by now she would be the grandmother and the mother to the second generation. She played usually the traditional role of supporting the husband while, you know, he built the empire and the business. And now it's called by the third generation the glue of the family, and sometimes they called it the chief promotional officer because she keeps the whole family united. Now she's very usually traditional, and if the father is ill or if the father dies, she plays the role of keeping everybody together, keeping the feud, keeping the brothers in check and the sisters. However, when she gets older as well and her decision-making starts to sometimes weaken, her memory loss, one brother would come and complain about the family, then she'd agree with him, and then the other brother comes and complains, and you find that she keeps changing her position in the argument because she's also getting old. So depending on that situation, you find that she plays that role, although she doesn't even sit on the board of directors. And then you have the second generation, which is usually the daughter of the founder. At the time, and this would be like 30 years, 25 years back, where they were not on the boards, even if they were on paperwork, they would have to sign some things, but they didn't know anything about the finances. They didn't attend the meetings. Sometimes they had to sign some papers, but they trusted their father, said, you know, sign the paper. So they signed the paper. They don't know how much the company is worth, what is happening, but they get usually monthly allowances from their father, and they have a nice lifestyle, and they'd never ask questions. Now, because women go through phases, their kids are young, they're expected to be with home, and the environment in most cases was dominating, male dominating. So the founder didn't want his daughters to be there. And the founder said, you know, we're in oil and the industry doesn't go with the female knowledge or expertise or education. So whether they're in construction, oil and gas, finances, IT, they didn't see that this was a good fit for the daughter to work and be in the middle of all men. So she was expected to, you know, have the social life and go there. As her kids grew older, usually they wanted to have more roles, but found resistance from the brothers and competition from their siblings. And so they were given usually the charity organization, the philanthropy activities of the family. They felt that women had more social skills and could carry on these things. So you'd always find them in the charity work, whether sponsored by the family or whether in a charity organization and the family would be sponsoring. And because they carry, if it's a family charity, then they carry the family's name. And if they tried even harder to get into the business and couldn't, they say, okay, take some money and go start your own business. However, they never gave them the support. What I mean by the support is the share services support, you know, the accounting, the finances, you know, things of how do you run your business. So they were just like thrown out there. Some of them didn't succeed. If the father and the founder was a believer, then you'd find that they brought them into the business. They brought them, they took them up the ladder, and they gave them more power and authority, and they were really right hand. So again, it's that perception. Now comes the third generation. They're more educated to things that are relevant to the business industries. And they come back, and there's now more opportunities in the market for them. So you find them going into international organizations, going into businesses outside the family, and then being recruited by the family to come into the company and start working there. Now, if the second generation, which is, they're still now in their 50s and 60s, maybe late 40s sometimes, the father dies, and then the brother says, and then they want to ask more questions. And so the brother would say, you know, business as usual. If you want to ask too many questions, here, we can buy you out and go take your money. And but guess what? If you spend it and don't invest it, and you're done with it, we don't have anything else to give you. So out of fear and out of not knowing what to do, and you know, business, because they're not used to this business and getting used to the lifestyle that they have, they usually let go and say, okay, fine, you take care of the business. And until women were actually on the board, they really didn't know what was happening. And now that some of them are on board, they don't know how to read the financial statements. They have fear because of their financial literacy. And so there's a lot of things that need to be done with raising their financial literacy, getting them more board certified, getting them more involved into the business. And so we highly recommend that women start working on themselves to build that kind of way. Now, the problem is when the co-founders are two brothers and then you have cousins. And so the family feud kind of continues out. Most of the companies now are working on corporate governance. However, whether the founder is alive or dead, the women don't know what are they looking for when they're looking at the corporate governance. They don't know what works for me, what doesn't work for me, what am I supposed to be looking at. So sometimes I actually get hired just as a behind the scene consultant to help the women understand what is the corporate governance, what are you looking, what questions you need to ask, things like that, and get them lawyers. So furthermore,
I just want to be very conscious of time because we have 2 minutes left.
Okay. Last point is sometimes their kids are not allowed to represent them in the family boards, yet their brothers' kids are allowed to be represented. So there's still discrimination in some family boards when it comes to women's empowerment. I
mean, you've given us a lot of information and you've opened up a whole lot of questions. We could probably extend the panel for another hour. I want to acknowledge your time for being here, but also we have another session starting. So if everyone also would like to join, the next session starts in 15 minutes, and it's the journey to diversity and inclusion. So some of you were asking about where do we go from here and what are the next steps, and those are some of the questions that we'll be answering. Dr. Basmah, if you wouldn't mind posting the link to your research in the chat, or if you give us permission, we can share it with the attendee after. Sure. I want to thank each of you for being really this was such an enjoyable discussion for me, and you've been a really engaging panel. I think the level of engagement as well from the attendees is pretty clear. Everyone here has enjoyed that and found everything quite insightful. So thank you again for being here. If you'd like to give just a kind of 10 to 15 second closing sentence. Any closing words?
Thank you, ladies. Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me with you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really impressive turnout and fantastic engagement from the audience. And great to see lots of men and women asking questions and participating.
And thank you for getting up at 1 in the morning to join us.
Yes.
It's my pleasure. It was my honor to join you all. Thank you for having me.
Same from me. Thank you all, and thank you for having me as well on the panel.
Thank you.
And you can put the link, and then if anyone has any questions, they can find me on LinkedIn, and we can carry the discussions.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.